and that's the raids that President Biden ordered yesterday on Iranian-backed Iraqi militias. The raids were along the Iraq-Syria border. This is a problem you know as well as anyone from your time as commander of U.S. forces in Baghdad. Do you think that this was an appropriate action, and what more do you think the U.S. can do about the problem, the danger posed to remaining U.S. forces in Iraq by these militias?
Well, I do support this, and I do believe that this is a problem, which is why these strikes were taken. These Iranian-supported Shia militia that have been a huge problem over the last 2 decades. We defeated them, as you will recall, in the second half of the second year of the surge in the battles of Sadr City and Basra and others. But they were allowed to reassemble and get back on the streets when the threat of ISIS loomed large in Iraq, and they have never left the streets since then, and are now much more heavily equipped and armed with weapons provided by Iran. And they have been shooting rockets and mortars and flying drones at our forces. Only a few thousand of them left there in a variety of bases around the country, including in the Kurdish region where they've been struck. And so this had to happen, I think. The question is, does this exacerbate the presence of the U.S. forces for the Iraqi government that doesn't like the Iranian supported militia, but they are a reality, and they are literally part of the overall forces of Iraq. In fact, there was just a huge parade of them in honor of them and what they had done. So that's the political dynamic of this, and we have to be very careful not to stress that over much, which is undoubtedly one reason that probably 2 of the strikes were in Syria and just 1 of them in Iraq. And it may be that there have to be some other asymmetric attacks against various assets in the Gulf or in Iran, where it's not completely clear who did what was done, but the Iranians will have a sense that we were behind it and that they should not allow their militia. They do largely control these militia and can direct them, and they're going to have to put a leash on them. And then the challenge is going to be for the Iraqi government that, as I said, does not love these elements at all, but did employ them, and they did fight hard against the Islamic State. They are a reality, and they're linked to political parties, because keep in mind what Iran has always sought to do in Iraq is what they have achieved in Lebanon, which is to have strong forces on the ground, Lebanese Hezbollah militia forces that have street muscle, and then to have corresponding political power in the parliament, the Iraqi Council of Representatives. So in other words, to Lebanonize Iraq, just as they have Lebanonized Iran. They're not quite at that level yet in the parliament. There are some very important Shia elements that swing back and forth between the government and the Iranian-supported desires. But that's the reality that a very competent prime minister and president and other ministers are dealing with in Iraq, with an election probable later this year.
And do you expect, General Petraeus, that these Iranian-backed militias or even Iran will retaliate for yesterday's U.S. action? And if so, what should we do?
Well, I suspect they will. And I mean, what we should do, and I think we presumably have, is we have to accelerate the development and deployment of really capable counter-drone systems. Those are in short supply. There's a lot in testing, but the drones have really changed the threat a fair amount, and then ensure that we have the other systems that can knock down rockets and missiles and so forth. So force protection is one of the steps that we have to take. And then, as I mentioned, I'd be examining, and I'm sure people are, what are the other actions we could take, perhaps, again, outside Iraq, because we don't want to stress the U.S.-Iraq relationship over much. You will have seen that the Iraqi military, which also doesn't really like these militias because they're pretty much out of their control, even though they're paid by the government, they had to issue a statement yesterday that described the U.S. strike as a violation of their sovereignty and so forth. So we have to be very careful about the very delicate balance of politics there in Baghdad.